Today, we're diving into a true medical game changer. It's a procedure that takes on one of the most dangerous conditions you can have, not with a massive incision, but from the inside out. This is the story of the EVAR Revolution. So let's just jump right in with a question that sounds, well, almost impossible. Your aorta is basically the superhighway for blood in your body. So how on earth do you fix a catastrophic failure on that highway without shutting everything down for major open surgery? That's the puzzle we're going to unpack. But before we can get to the incredible solution, we've really got to understand the problem. And believe me, it's a serious one, a hidden weakness lurking in the body's most important artery. And that weakness has a name, an abdominal aortic aneurysm, or AAA for short. The easiest way to think about it is like a weak spot, a bubble on the wall of a tire. Every beat of your heart pushes blood through, and over time, that pressure causes a section of the aorta to bulge out, getting weaker and bigger and a whole lot more dangerous. And this is where it gets really, really serious. You see, for smaller aneurysms, the risk is manageable, but as they grow, the danger just skyrockets. Once that bulge hits about 7 centimeters, there is a nearly 1 in 3 chance it will burst within a single year. It is, quite literally, a ticking time bomb inside a person's body. So when you're faced with that kind of risk, the classic solution was a massive operation with huge risks of its own. But then, a completely new way of thinking came along, a way to fix the problem from the inside. This was the beginning of EVAR. And what's wild is how fast this all happened. The basic idea was first tried in 1987. Just 4 years later, a surgeon named Dr. Juan Perotti published his groundbreaking work. And by 1999, it had FDA approval in the United States. We're talking about just over a decade to completely change the game in vascular surgery. So what was the big idea? Honestly, it's so simple, it's brilliant. Instead of cutting out the bad part of the aorta, what if you can just reline it? You know, like putting a new, strong pipe inside an old, cracking one. This creates a safe, new tunnel for the blood to flow through, taking all that dangerous pressure off the bulge. And here's how they do it. Through just a couple of tiny incisions in the groin, a surgeon snakes a thin tube, a catheter, all the way up into the aorta. Tucked inside that tube is a collapsed device. It's a fabric tube held open by a metal frame called a stent graft. Once it's in the perfect spot, they deploy it. It pops open, pressing against the healthy artery walls, and just like that, you have a new pathway. The blood flows through the graft, and the dangerous aneurysm is sealed off from all that pressure. Okay, so this minimally invasive approach sounds incredible, right? Almost too good to be true. So how does it really stack up against that classic open belly operation? Well, the data tells a really interesting story. The immediate difference is just wow. Major studies like the EVAR-1 trial put these two procedures head to head, and the results were stunningly clear. The risk of dying within 30 days of the procedure was nearly 3 times lower with EVAR. For patients, this was a massive, massive leap in safety. So the main takeaway from multiple huge clinical trials was undeniable. In the short run, EVAR meant you were less likely to die, less likely to have a major complication, and you'd recover way faster. It was a clear, unambiguous win. But, and you knew there was a but coming, the story gets a little more complicated when you look at the long term. While EVAR was way safer at the beginning, it came with a trade-off. EVAR patients were more likely to need another procedure down the road to fix or maintain the repair. The old-school open surgery, as risky as it was up front, was more often a one-and-done kind of fix. In fact, when researchers followed these patients for years, they saw that early survival advantage from EVAR start to fade away. After about 3, maybe up to 8 years, the long-term survival rates for both groups started to look pretty similar. And that raised a huge question. Why? What was happening years later that was closing that gap? And that brings us to the catch, the unique challenge of the EVAR procedure. You could call it the Achilles heel. The very device that makes it all work can sometimes become a source of problems itself. And the number one problem is something called an endoleak. Now remember, the whole entire point of the stent graft is to seal off that aneurysm. An endoleak means that seal isn't working perfectly, and blood is still finding a way to leak into the sac. And when that happens, it starts to repressurize that weak spot, bringing back the exact same risk of rupture you were trying to fix. Now, not all leaks are the same. A type 1 is a big deal. That's a leak at the main seal, at the top or bottom. A type 2, which is more common, is when smaller side arteries that branch off the aorta start to backfill the sac. And then you have a type 3, which is a failure of the device itself, like a tear in the fabric or the pieces coming apart. The thing is, some of these leaks, especially the type 2 ones, might just go away on their own. You can watch them. But others, particularly type 1 and type 3 leaks, are dangerous. They completely defeat the purpose of the surgery, and you have to go back in with another procedure to fix the leak and make the aneurysms safe again. And all of this leads us to the final and maybe the most critical point. Getting an EVAR procedure isn't the end of the journey. It's actually the start of a lifelong commitment. This quote from the research really just says it all. The trade you make for a safer, less invasive surgery is the need for constant vigilance. It means patients need regular scans, like CT scans, for the rest of their lives, just to make sure that graft is still doing its job perfectly. But here's the tough part. Here's the reality. A study of Medicare patients found a pretty sobering statistic. Just 5 years after their surgery, half of them were no longer getting those recommended yearly scans. Half. And that's where the real danger is, because if you're not looking, these potentially deadly problems, an endoleak, or the whole device shifting out of place can happen silently. The protection that patient thought they had could be gone, and they wouldn't even know it. Which leaves us with this final crucial question. EVAR absolutely revolutionized treatment. It gave us a much safer way to fix a deadly problem. But that safety comes with a condition, a lifetime of surveillance. And for both doctors and patients, figuring out how to manage that trade-off is the real key to making this incredible technology work, not just for a few years, but for a lifetime.